previously that there were some issues with the Fiat that I still wasn't happy with. Today we're going to address those issues and then we're going to go for a drive on one of my favorite roads. So stay tuned to the end for that. The main issue with the car was the suspension. It was way too stiff. And when I say stiff, I don't mean, oh, it had a rough ride. I mean, it was dangerously stiff. If you hit a bump going around a corner, the car was so light and the suspension so stiff that it just skipped across the surface of the road. When you're expecting your car to turn and it skips and goes straight, that's not a good feeling. You don't want to go around corners very fast. So I started off by weighing the car. I bought a set of corner scales and I determined that the car weighs just under 1,500 pounds, with 55% of the weight at the rear and 45% of the weight at the front. Then I ordered new shocks for the rear with the correct spring rates, and I used those to replace the cheap generic shocks that I bought off of Amazon. Up front, I replaced the pivot point on the pushrod suspension. I replaced the one on the left with the one on the right. The one on the right changes the angle of the pushrods and the shock, and it also uses bearings instead of a bushing. I also bought a similar set of shocks to what I used in the back. These shocks give about 4 inches of travel, whereas the motorcycle shocks I was trying to use only had about 2 inches of travel. Some of you pointed out in the past that the shift pattern on the car was wrong, because when we originally built it, you pushed forward to shift up and backwards to shift down. So I rebuilt the shifter linkage, and now you pull back to shift up and push forward to shift down. Another problem I was having was that the front end of the car became very light at over 80 miles an hour. There was just too much air getting sucked up underneath the front of the car, and it was lifting the front end up. The air was coming under the car and getting trapped here under the fuel tank. There was just too much pressure building up under here, and it was lifting the front of the car. So I made this plate out of aluminum and installed it right here. I also cut this hole right here to allow any air that does come in to escape through these vents in the hood. The car was also really loud, and a lot of that sound was coming from the intake. So I took off these aftermarket air filters and I modified the original air box to fit on the car. I also installed an insert in the tail of the muffler to make it a little bit quieter. Another issue I had was that there was just way too much heat coming from the firewall. So I completely removed the old firewall and I built the new one. I built a metal frame. I also built a heat shield that goes directly in front of the exhaust, but leaves a gap between it and the new firewall. I sealed up the holes behind the seat belts with a piece of aluminum. I made the rest of the firewall out of aluminum as well. Sealed it all up with seam sealer, and then I covered everything with a lot of heat shielding material. The inner heat shield is removable, and I also still have an access panel so that I can access the front of the engine if I need to. So after making all those improvements, I was ready to take the car on a nice long drive. I took it to one of my favorite roads, and I'm extremely happy with the way the car did. The suspension is so much better now than it was, and it's adjustable. The car leans into the corners now like it should. The wheels stay planted on the ground. It's just such a better driving experience. There's almost no heat coming from the firewall. The car feels planted even over 80 miles an hour. And the sound from the engine is much nicer than it used to be. It's a much cleaner, smoother revving sound. There was kind of a popping sound that came from the intake with the old air cleaners, but with the original airbox on it, it just sounds smooth and really great. So yeah, I'm really pleased with how this car has come out. It's definitely one of the coolest things I've ever made. I'm really enjoying it. Hope you guys like it as well. See you on the next one. Thanks. Bye.